Hey guys, welcome back to Horse 2 Cinema. Today I'm going to be reviewing 28 Years Later, and this was directed by Danny Boyle. Boyle is somebody who, his early films I really adore, with Trainspotting in particular being like an all-time favorite of mine. Um, and kind of, I find a lot of intrigue as well, like kind of in the middle of his career, especially with, kind of some of his experimentation with films like 127 Hours, for example. But I have to admit, I've had him on Washed Watch lately. I haven't seen Steve Jobs yet, which I've heard from some people that I really trust, that it's a really interesting film. Um, Truth be told, I'm just not that interested personally in a Steve Jobs biopic. And then he did that movie in 2019 about the Beatles called Yesterday, which is just horrendous. It is to the Beatles what that sequence in Space Jam 2 is to Warner Bros. Properties. And I'm also just not that big of a fan of his 2002 zombie film 28 Days Later. I like it fine, but I do find that the way it's shot with like kind of those like very pixely, early digital cameras to be kind of an impediment to the overall like fluidity of the action horror set pieces. I appreciate the experimentation, but I couldn't just help but feeling that I kind of felt like I'd be more on the edge of my seat if I could actually, see what was happening a little bit better. And I think it's a solid, character movie. I think it's very important in the zombie like subgenre to have good characters and have some elements of like not necessarily social commentary, but sort of like just sort of like about human interactions. And I think it has that, but not necessarily in a way that I feel like I haven't seen before in the genre or anything that was blowing me away. But the trailer definitely sold me on it. Made me want to check out the film. I think it kind of sold itself as the way that this world has evolved really significantly after this far long after the outbreak. And overall, I was just kind of curious to see what made Boyle want to revisit the material all these years later. As the title suggests, the film is set 28 years after the outbreak, which we see another taste of in the opening scene, where the virus has largely been contained to the UK, which is under strict international quarantine. One community living on a small island off the coast has managed to isolate themselves from most of the danger of the mainland. 12-year-old kid, Spike, goes on to his first voyage to the mainland with his father, and he eventually sets off on his own to find a doctor that is rumored to live on the mainland so that he can figure out a solution to his mother's illness. Again, so I went in with kind of low expectations given, some of Boyle's recent output and, and my feelings on the first movie. But I ended up kind of loving this film. First of all, I think it's brilliantly shot. I mean, I feel like I understood what Boyle was trying to go with the, the digital stuff in the first movie. But again, I feel like the way, just the very like pixely way it looks in the final output kind of, for me, it kind of distances me from the action. It just feels like, I think he's trying to add a little bit of tension by making you feel distance, but for me, it just kind of took me out of it. Whereas here, most of the movie, from what I understand, was shot with an iPhone, or at least a lot of the like big kind of horror action set pieces, when Spike and his father go into the woods and stuff like that. And with the iPhone photography, I think that you still kind of achieve that like digital kineticism where, everything just feels like it's moving constantly. It sort of adds to the tension a little bit, but at the same time, it's a much clearer image. So for me, I was never distanced from it. I always felt very, kind of engrossed with what was going on the screen. I just felt like every set piece was able to breathe a lot more fully in comparison to the first film. I also just really love the way that Boyle approached, kind of the evolution of this world, the way that the zombies in particular, after all of this time, living in quarantine on the mainland, occasionally having contact with humans, start to kind of evolve in their own way. They start going after animals, of course, for example. But really interestingly, it's almost like they evolve as pack hunters, so, in the way that wolves have like an alpha male kind of thing. There's like, that they have that same thing with a zombie. Like there's one zombie in a group that just becomes a lot bigger than the other ones and can run a lot faster, is a lot stronger. You get these really horrifying images at one point of they find like a deer, its head has been pulled, like with its spine still attached, like it's pulled off its body with the spine still attached, and then he like put that on a tree. Like it's a really kind of gross image. And in terms of when our characters get involved with this pack and everything, it makes it really tense when you see this like 7 foot tall like super strong zombie like chasing after our characters. There's even this one shot where they're on an abandoned train, and they come across this alpha zombie, and he starts chasing them, and you see like his massive hog flapping around. Like it's almost played as a joke. Like some members of the audience were laughing, myself included, but that doesn't take away from how tense the actual scene is, because again, you're still like, you kind of seen what this guy can do to all these animals and to people and stuff. So you really don't want to see that happen to the main characters. And in terms of the characters too, I thought this was a really big step up from the first film. Again, I like the cast in that movie. It's just I feel like, in terms of characterization, it feels a little bit archetypal. It feels a little bit like, like it's not something I haven't seen in a zombie movie before, especially with, a zombie film like that that takes place in the very early days of the outbreak. Whereas the archetypes for the characters in this movie, to me, fit more into like a, some kind of a coming of age film of sorts. I mean, of course, mixed with all this, danger going around. There's even kind of a little bit of a medieval tone to the setting of the movie. For example, they're using like bows and arrows, and they have all this, kind of like they have this walled infrastructure around the island and everything. But overall, the first thing I thought of was sort of a coming of age movie. You have the mother played by Jodie Comer, who is, very overprotective, I think, of her son, even though she's like clearly sick throughout a lot of the movie. So there's not a lot she can actually do to prevent her son from, going off on his own or with his dad to, sort of, learn more about what life is like, essentially. You have the father played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, who, is like kind of excited to take his son off into the world. He's very protective of him as well. But he wants to teach his son all these sort of survival tasks. But he's clearly putting his son in a lot of danger, and there's, you could argue he's putting him in more danger than he's ready for at that age. And then, of course, when they get back after the first, voyage, like, he's very neglectful of his family. I won't totally spoil what he does, but he does something that, makes it seem like he doesn't care, for his family quite as much as you would hope. There's the mysterious doctor played by Ray Fiennes, who I love that basically we don't see him on screen at all for the first, like, really just until the third act of the movie, even though he gets roughly top billing, I think. Like, he's like the biggest actor name in the movie. We all know he's going to be there. But yeah, and he just kind of, the way that other characters talk about him, they talk about him like he's this insane person who has this very like almost mythical presence in the stories people tell about him. It's very like menacing. You're very like scared to meet him by the time you get to that point in the film. But really, the best character in the film is the son. It's Spike, played by Alfie Williams, who I think just does a terrific job. This is just one of the best child performances I've seen in a long time. And he's a very mature kid, of course, like given the circumstances in which he's grown up. But he is also just that. He's a kid. And I don't think the movie lets you forget that. Like, despite the fact that you see him do all these sort of survival tasks and kind of hold his own a little bit, he's he's very afraid of the violence of the outside world, and I think ultimately very afraid of death, which is, the great kind of mystery of life, and the root behind most people's fears. I think that's ultimately kind of what the film is about by the end. It really is a film about death and coming to terms with it as somebody who's growing up in a violent world. Which leads me to the third act, which absolutely made the movie for me. I just loved what they did, and I won't totally spoil what they did. Some of you might not have seen the film, so I won't make this a completely like spoiler review or anything. But basically, once they reach the doctor, the tone of the film becomes less like menacing and much more kind of somber and much more kind of heartfelt and sentimental, to be honest. And I just really loved, what they did. Having seen the marketing for the film, I think it was really subversive. The way, they put that gigantic bone temple on the poster with the big like biological hazard symbol, from the first movie, and it just looks like such a menacing, like scary image. And then you get to the bone temple, you get to where the context for that in the film, and it just does not read like that at all. And there's a couple images in particular in the film, it takes place at night, basically, involving Spike and the Bone Temple, that are really just like some of the most beautiful images I think I've seen in a film in a long, certainly this year. Yeah, I was just really moved by where that third act went. And when I say the third act, I'm not talking about the stuff that ties into the beginning of the film, and yeah, I won't spoil anything, especially for British people out there. But there's another detail that ties into like the very last scene of the film. I don't know how I feel about that stuff. My immediate reaction was, okay, that's really interesting, but what are you trying to say with that? And I've read some stuff about the film afterwards that that makes some sense to me about where they were going with that. But yeah, still don't think it was totally needed. It does make me a little bit nervous for the next film that it's going to focus a lot on that stuff. Honestly, I was just really like, I think they should just make another really great character movie like this that's subversive, and like, I'll be happy with that. So yeah, I really dug this. I'm gonna give this one 4 stars. This is honestly like one of my favorite movies that I've seen in a film this year. Probably my second favorite horror movie after Sinners. So yeah, no, and again, I was not expecting to have this kind of reaction to it. So really, really excited to see what they end up doing with the next films, and just what Danny Boyle ends up doing next. Because I'll take him off the watch list. I think he's still got quite a bit of filmmaking chops left. Anyway, that's going to do it for this review. If you like this video, please like the review down below, and subscribe to the channel if you're new. I've got more videos coming up soon. Should be reviewing Eddington pretty soon. Going to try and check out Superman in the near future. So stay tuned for all that, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.